Alright, welcome back to my YouTube channel. For today we're going to make a simple character selection menu. So this would be for selecting a character out of a bunch of others, and since there are no prefabs or no models, what I'm going to use now are going to be the 3D objects inside of Unity. So let's right click on the hierarchy, select 3D object, the cube. This would be one. So I'm going to reset the transform so we can see it at the middle. I'm also going to use a capsule, reset the transform also, and then finally there is also going to be a cylinder. So this should be okay. Now let's see. Let me drag them so we can see them properly. So these will be the game objects which we're going to be using. These are going to be our characters: the cube, cylinder, and the capsule. So let's add the material to this before we go far. So let me right click on the project panel, go into create, and then select material, and I will call this cube. And I'm going to duplicate these two more times with Ctrl D. Okay, so let me rename this to cylinder, and this I would call it capsule. Alright, so for the cube we'll give it somewhat red color around there, then add the metallicness just to make it shine a little. So right there for the capsule I'm going to choose a green. You can choose any color of your choice, and also increase the smoothness and metallicness to your own taste. So let me see about there. And for the cylinder I will give this a blue color, a light blue, so this will be like very light. Then I can drag this there. So these are what we're going to be using as our characters. Now I want a button to appear for every character containing the name of the character. So for the cube, a button should be here identifying that it's a cube. For the cylinder, the same thing, a button should be there showing that it's a cylinder. And for the capsule, also the same thing. So now we're going to be using the UI. So let's go into the UI and use a button. Alright, so let's reset the button. You can see it somewhere around the middle, and then for the width, let me give it something like 50 or 70, and then for the height I'm going to give it 40, somewhere around there. And let's bring this down to around there, and then let's duplicate this button and bring it to the side. So this button would be used to swap the characters. Now for this button I'm going to call this let's say next, and for the text also we're going to name this next. For the one on top, this is going to be our cube button. For the text, let's call this cube. And for the color, we can pick something identical, so maybe red should do, just to show that it's a cube. Let's see, so we can duplicate these 2 more times, just like the materials. Let's call this cylinder button. For the text, let's call this cylinder. For the color, let's choose green. And finally, for this, let's call this capsule. For the text, also, let's call it capsule. And the color for this would be blue, so same as before. And these are going to be the buttons which we'll be using. So let's drag this up for the game objects. Now, for us to be able to swap these game objects, we need to do that using C#. So what we will do is we're going to create a C# script. And then we're going to call these characters. And we can double click this now to open it up in Visual Studio. So I'll see you there. Alright, so now inside Visual Studio, we will start by making a few variables. So let's use public float. I'll call this swap number. So this should be it. And then I want a few game objects. In my case, that's 3 because I have 3 characters. So let's make all this a public game object. Let me call this cube. Then I'm going to copy this line and duplicate it 2 more times. In this case, this would be a capsule, and above would be a cylinder. Right, so we would add one more namespace. Let's copy this using Unity Engine. And then let's add .ui to this. Right, so we have the game objects and then we have the float to control the swap. Now we also need one for our buttons. So let me call this a public button. We'll have a cube btn button. And then I'll duplicate this 2 more times. Cylinder. Then I have capsule, button, and this would be cube. Okay, so these would be for the buttons and these for the game objects. and in our start, what I want to do is set this swap number and to set this to 0, so it always starts with 0. For the update, okay, so once this swap number gets set to 0, inside our update we can now start swapping the characters. Now what we'll be using is a switch statement, which is a direct alternative to the if statement. They work similarly, except we will not be using if, we're going to be using cases. So we can type in switch, and then for the switch statement we need to indicate which variable we want to be swapped. So in our case it's the swap number. As it goes up, we want to be changing characters, so we put the swap number here, and then inside of the switch statement we can type in a case instead of an if, and this would be case 1, and then you open a full colon to indicate that you want this line of code or whatever line of code follows under it, to be executed. And then the line of code will keep getting executed unless we type in a break. So this stops it from being executed. So anything you write from here or from here down to here will be executed. So since we have 3 characters, I'm going to copy this and then duplicate it 2 more times. And the second will be case 2. And the last is going to be default. So that's more or less like the else statement inside of the if statement. So the last is going to be default. Now our first character is obviously a cube, and then a cylinder, then followed by a capsule. So once it's on 1, or once the swap number gets to 1, we want to set our cube active. So in this case we're going to say cube.set active. We want to set this true, and then we can copy this line of code. In this case we want the cylinder. So in this case we want the cylinder, and for this we want our capsule. Alright, so all will be set active for different cases. Now for our buttons also, we want each button to appear with its game object. So for this cube button, we want it to appear with the cube, and then the capsule, that the cylinder, all for their own respective buttons. So under each of them we need to type in the button. So in this cube it's going to be cube btn, but then we can't just write dot set active true, because this is not a game object, it's a UI. So what we want to do is we want to tell Unity that this is a game object, or we want it to view this cube button as a game object. So what we need to do is type in dot game object and then dot set active to true. Okay, so let's copy this and then duplicate it 2 more times. So in the second case this would be a cylinder, and for the final case this would be a capsule. And with this we are done with each of them. So finally what we need to do is if one game object is active, then we want the previous one to be deactivated, And the reason for that is because if you have all game objects available on the set, alright, so take for example these buttons which are right on top of each other. If you deactivate this capsule button, you can see there's a cylinder behind it, and if you deactivate the cylinder, you can see there's a cube right behind it. So we don't want all of them to be present at runtime, so each of them has to be there one at a time. And for each of these game objects also, if I reset this, you can see it's in the middle. If I reset the capsule, you can see it's inside the cylinder, and then the cube also, it's also inside. So this is not something you would want. You would want each of them to be available one at a time. So to do this, we need to make the previous cases to not be active once one has been set to be active. So in this case, our default is 0, which covers that up, and then the case 1 is going to be our cube. So once this is done, what we need to do is copy this, and then below we paste it, and then we set the capsule to false, and then also the capsule btn, we set this also to be false. So this takes care of the previous one. And then for the cylinder, let's paste this again. So it's going to be the cube, but we would set this to false, and also the button, we set it to false. And finally for the capsule, so we want to set this cylinder to false, and also the cylinder button, we would set this also to be false. Alright, so this takes care of swapping the characters, but then for the number now, which would be the center of attention, so it follows this swap to switch, this swap number to switch, and then we need a method telling it that it should be switching or it should be swapped. So in this case, we're going to make another method. This will be a public void, and then we can call this swap. And then below this, what we need to do is we need to increment swap by 1. So let's call this swap number and then add plus plus to it. And then we need to check to see if our swap number, if this is greater than 2, because the default is 0, the first case is 1, and then second case is 2. So our number highest value is going to be 2. So if this is greater than 2, then we want to set our swap number to be equal to 0, and this takes care of swapping. So with this done, we can save and go back into Unity. Alright, so once this gets downloading, you can now right click in the hierarchy, create empty game object, and then call these characters. So you can reset this to be wherever you want, and then drag this script into the characters. So this should be it, and then we can now drag the game object. So in this case, it's a cube. You can drag the cube to where it is, and then the capsule, same thing, and the cylinder also to where it is, where it's supposed to be. And then the buttons, for the cube button, drag the cube button, the cylinder btn, same thing, and then the cylinder to cylinder, capsule to capsule. Alright, so this takes care of the indication, and then this next button, it needs a method on click. So drag the characters into it and then go into characters and select swap. So this should swap, and then the three buttons now we want to set them to not to be deactivated once the game starts. Same thing for the game objects. Alright, so with this done, we can play our game, and you can see our capsule is there, and then the cube and our cylinder. So each character has his own button which you can click on. Now what we need to do is we need to make these buttons actually work for the character, and that is what we'll be doing now. Alright, so to give these buttons functions, what we need to do is first of all create another script, and we're going to call this script our data manager. Right, so this will be our data manager, and then we can go ahead and open this up in Visual Studio. Right, so first we need to copy this using Unity Engine, and then add dot scene management. Once we do this, we need to make a public variable, so it's going to be a public integer. Let's call this number. Alright, so inside, and then we need to create an instance of this data manager, so it will be like a singleton, which I would explain in future videos hopefully, but right now just follow what I'm doing. So this will be a public static data manager. This is going to be called instance. And then inside our start method, we would say instance, or we'll check to see if instance if this is equal to null, then let's set instance equal to this. Okay, so this is like I'm creating let's say it's like creating a script which cannot be instantiated again. So it's going to be a static script which holds basic data. It's not going to be played around with at runtime, or going to be changing dynamically or randomly at runtime. And the next thing we need to do is to not destroy this, so we can type in don't destroy on load, and what we don't want destroyed is this game object, so that will be this dot game object. Alright, so we don't want this to get destroyed, and then I wouldn't be using the update, so you can delete that. All we need now is to check to see which character has been selected, and with this we can create three public methods. So this would be a public void. The first would be my cube select, and then we can copy this, and the second is going to be my cylinder, and the third would be capsule. Okay, so for the cube, we want to set the number to be 0. So we want to set the number to be 0, and for the cylinder, we will copy this number. We want to set this to 1, and for the capsule, we would set this number to 2, and then once we set the number to this, we want to load a new scene. So we're going to access our scene manager, dot load scene, and that will be scene 1, because our current scene is 0, scene 0. So copy this and paste it in each method, and this should take care of it. So let's save this now and go back into Unity. Alright, so we already have one scene. You can see this is our scene 1, the current scene which we're on. Now we need to create another scene and call this scene 2, and then go into the build settings and then transfer the scene 1 to be up top and 2 also to be there. So it's going to be the 1 and 2. So that takes care of the scene manager. Next is going to be our button set, and we need to create another empty game object, and we can rename this data manager, reset the transform and drag this script to it, and then let's set these buttons active temporarily. So for the cube, go down to the on click event and drag this data manager to it. So it will be our cube select. For the cylinder, same thing. And the capsule, finally, do this for the capsule. So we can now set this tree to not be active once again, and then we can test our game now. So you can see our capsule is on. This is cube and this cylinder. So let's click on the button. You can see it takes us into our scene 2, and when we check the data manager, you can see it sets the integer value to 1. So the final thing which we need to do now is to instantiate our character in this new scene using the number, and then so let's quickly do that so we can end the video. And so to quickly do that now, let's come into our projects folder. Let's right click, create a new C# script, and let's call this my character. And then we can double click this to open it up in Visual Studio. Alright, and so once this opens up, all we need is a public reference to all 3 characters once again. And so we can type in public game object, and the first game object was a cube, so let's type that. Second game object, a cylinder, and then the final game object would be a capsule. Alright, so now we have 3 game objects, which are currently available. So we're not going to use the update. We can go ahead and delete that. And then inside the start, what we want is to start a coroutine. This is a method that uses time, so we can wait for a few seconds before a line of code or a method is called upon. So this coroutine, I'm going to call this spawn character, or just spawner. It's a short form. And then below the start, let's make an I enumerator. And this would be our spawner. Let's spell this well. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to wait for at least 2 seconds. So let's type in yield return new wait for seconds, and this would be 2f. So after waiting for 2 seconds, what we want to do is we want to check to see if our data manager, and so this is what the static reference does. It gives a reference to just one instance of this data manager. So we can't have two game objects containing this same script. There will be only one script to control everything in general. And yeah, so for this instance, you need to use a double equal to sign, because it's obviously a comparison using the if statement. Without this, it's not going to work. So you can't use a single equal symbol. You have to use two of them. Now let's save this. So if you followed me and you made this error, make sure you correct it. Then go back to the character. So let's type in data manager dot instance, then dot number, because I'm sure that's what we named it. You can't this public int number. So we want to check to see if this number is equal to 0. If this number is equal to 0, then we want a line of code to be executed, and then else if so if this data manager, let's copy this line and paste it here. So if this number is equal to 1, we want to also execute another line of code. And then finally, there is going to be an else statement. Okay. So else if this is equal to 1, we want another thing to happen. And then else, finally, we want something else to happen if these two conditions are not met. And the simple thing which we want to do is we want to instantiate this game object. So in this first scenario, we will check to see if this number is equal to 0. Then we want to instantiate. And so swap number. If the number is 0, then we want our capsule to be spawned in. So let's instantiate the game object. So that game object is going to be our capsule, and then we need to give it a position. So it's going to be the default position, which is transform.position, and then the default rotation also is going to be transform.rotation. And then we need to copy this and paste it down here and replace this capsule. So if the number is set to 1, then I believe this would be for our cylinder. Or cube. So it's going to be for our cube. Let's type in cube. And finally, for our cylinder, we type in cylinder. Alright, so this is just a simple thing which we would be doing. Now with this done, we can save it and go set this up inside of Unity. So let's go back. And I have an error with the weight, so let me type it well. Save this. And also for my data manager, add an A to that. Then so that should be okay. Save this now and go back. So that should be all the errors. It's downloading now. Now we need to make prefabs out of these 3 game objects. So I'm going to highlight 3 of them, set them active. I'm going to drag them into the project folder or panel, and then have a prefab of each of them. So with this, we can now go into our scene 2. Or before that, let's hide them and then save this. Go into our scene 2 and then create an empty game object. Call this our spawner, and then reset the transform. Drag our character, my character script onto it, and then fill in these open spaces for the prefabs. So for the capsule, drag the capsule over there. The cylinder, do the same thing. And the cube also, place it there. And with this done, everything should be alright. We can now go back into our first scene and then test the game. Alright, so pick a random character, click on the button, and you can see our cube gets instantiated. Let me try that again. So this is our capsule. Let's click the button, and the cylinder pops. So I mixed up the numbers. Let me quickly fix that. Okay, so back inside of my character, the numbers have to be set up like 0 should be for cube, and then 1 for cylinder, and the final one, which should be 2, should be for your capsule. So I've already changed all that, and with this done, you can save and go back into Unity. You can test it to be certain it works. And you can see I have a capsule. If I click the button, my capsule gets instantiated in my scene 2, and you can see for the number it's set to 2, so 2 represents my capsule. And you can test this for other game objects like the cube and the cylinder. So let's try this for the cylinder, and you can see it pops up in a new scene. So that's just a simple way to make a character selection menu and then instantiate the character in a new scene. So if you enjoyed the video, give me a like, subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my content. Thank you for watching this video, and see you in my next video.